I spent the past few weeks researching every single aspect of how to make Döner Kebab at home, and today we're bringing this to a conclusion. I am making a full Berlin-style döner from scratch. There's also an update on the bread issue, and of course we're going to be talking about sauce because that's the key ingredient to bring everything together. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, my favorite all-in-one solution if you want to put anything on a beautiful website, which is in fact exactly what I'll be doing with this recipe. More on that later. Now let's make some döner, shall we? First, let me set the rules for this recreation. I want three things. One, of course, it must be recognizable as a Berlin-style döner in both taste and appearance. Two, this has to be a realistic recipe. Like, no freaky gadgets, please. It shouldn't take all day. I want every single one of you to be able to replicate this at home. And three, I want to put a little bit of a twist on it. You know, just enough so that it's not a pure recreation. Cooking is about creativity after all. Let's begin with my new and very unusual approach to döner bread. To refresh your memory, this is an original döner pide. It's extremely airy and very light. In fact, this entire loaf only weighs 500 grams. The bread I made in a video a few weeks ago was delicious, but much denser than the original. It had the same size, but was about 75% heavier. And the result of that was that if you cut a quarter of that bread off, one of these classic döner triangles, and you stuff that with döner fillings, then the ratio of bread and filling was way off. There was too much bread, even though it was delicious. That was definitely the biggest difference to the original and the biggest flaw in my recipe. I tried a million things to improve my results, including resting the dough much longer or adding much more water. I think the evidence for industrial additives in this bread is pretty strong because even after a few days, this is still really soft and not even stale at all. And I think whatever causes the texture and the rise of this bread has something to do with that as well. So once again, I had to come up with a workaround. I made a simple dough, only flour, water, yeast and salt, making sure I get a total weight of 500 grams. After a first rest, I flour my dough and roll it out into the size of a döner bread. This will go on a piece of baking paper and then onto a tray to rest for a full 90 minutes. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, this looks really flat. Is that right? Wait for it. 1.5 hours later, my dough has risen nicely, but I know it still looks too flat. Just proceed as usual. Press in some dimples, add sesame and nigella seeds on top, and into the hot oven we go for around 10 minutes or until golden brown and beautiful like this. We're almost there in terms of size, but still quite off in terms of thickness. Okay, let's wrap this into a kitchen towel to soften as it cools, and I'll explain. We've been focusing on replicating döner in its raw form, and by that I mean the big round loaf, the puffy one, but instead we really should be focusing on the final result. There's one step I've forgotten to take into account. Each piece of döner bread always gets toasted in a sandwich grill like this one. And guess what this does? Exactly. A fluffy piece of döner gets pressed into a sheet for slightly crunchy outside and soft inside. That's delicious, but order a döner in Berlin, you're definitely gonna see this. And if we toast up a piece of our bread now, look at that. Not so different anymore, are they? And most importantly, these slices are more or less same in weight, meaning you actually get the right ratio of bread to filling in each bite, and that is exactly what we were going for. Let me be honest though, there's still one last difference. The store-bought bread is much lighter to the bite, it's not as chewy, but you know, I think this is really as close as we're gonna get here. Next, let's talk about meat. I decided to go for chicken this time. You can check my döner meat video for why I don't think a little rotisserie grill like that is a good idea. Now, earlier in this video, I mentioned that the result should definitely be recognizable as a Berlin-style Döner Kebab. And a chicken kebab, or Gemüse kebab, is definitely a very popular option these days. Even though, yes, layers of veal and minced meat are the classic, but I am done working with that one. Instead, I get the meat off of my roasted chicken thighs, cutting it into chunky shreds. I add some dried herbs and spices for a classic döner meat flavor with a good dollop of yogurt, a pinch of salt and optional MSG. And then I give everything a good mix. You can let the meat absorb the flavor for up to a few hours, and once you're ready to serve, alongside some strips of red and green bell pepper, add the chicken to a sheet pan, drizzle with olive oil, and that will go into a super hot oven until crispy brown. And since I'm making the chicken-based Gemüse Döner, there's another thing that most of the popular shops here in Berlin do, which is adding fried veggies into their chicken kebabs, and I think it takes it to a whole new level. I get an eggplant and I cut that into pretty small but not tiny cubes. Then sprinkle them with salt and set aside. Next is potato, skin on is fine. I dice that as well, same size. Drop those into some cold water to get rid of excess starch, and then finally there is carrot, which is a bit hard to handle, so make sure to be careful. Add a very generous amount of oil, about 2 centimeters, into a deep skillet, and first add your potatoes and carrots, that you have to dry very well before you do, by the way. Stir occasionally, but give the veggies time to brown a bit each time. Then add your eggplant, which I've lightly squeezed and removed all excess moisture after. Fry everything until golden colored. This might take a while, and then get them out on a paper towel. This stuff is so delicious that I can easily just eat a Döner sandwich with just that. But hold on, we're not quite there yet. There's still sauce that we need to talk about. In most of Turkey and the Middle East, where of course Döner and its cousin shawarma are from, you would probably encounter a yogurt-based sauce. But the somewhat, nastier European and German fast food versions of Döner, they're definitely heavy on the mayo. There's a bit of variety among shops, but in general I can guarantee that those sauces are at least 50% mayo, which admittedly does make everything very rich and creamy. Oh, and plus there's a lot of sugar in those sauces. And then a few dried herbs and dried garlic. Now, I don't really want to go that route, but I think in moderation, these things could be quite useful. There must be some type of middle ground. I'm starting my sauce with a bit of tahini, which is a flavor that I borrow from shawarma sauce, and a splash of regular water. When you mix those, they emulsify and get very thick, which will help us add thickness to the sauce. Well, duh. Now I'm adding full-fat Greek yogurt, which is a much more reasonable and very creamy sauce base. And now with all that richness already in there, just a good squeeze of mayo will be enough to kind of take all of that into that nostalgic street food direction. Speaking of which, a bit of sugar is also definitely another thing that you need to hit that nasty note, which we can then balance with a bit of salt and a bit of rice vinegar. Finally, you can add an assortment of dried herbs of your choice, dill and mint being the most important ones in my view. Now, why am I going for dried herbs, you might ask? And that would be a very good question. The thing is, I do prefer fresh herbs, but only if the sauce is fresh as well. After 1 or 2 days, I don't like what's happening to fresh herbs in the sauce. With dried herbs, it's like the opposite. You need to give this type of sauce with dried herbs at least a few hours in the fridge, but what you get then is like a very pleasant, very even carpet of flavors rather than like little spikes and bursts of fresh herb flavor. Does that make any sense? Am I making any sense? Anyhow, same goes for garlic. I do like garlic powder in the sauce rather than fresh garlic, especially over time. You can even go super extra and grate some feta cheese into your sauce. Look at how thick and creamy this sauce has got. It's very important. If your sauce is too thin, it might make the bread soggy, which can in fact lead to some leakage, which is extremely undesirable in döner. Anyhow, now all that's left to do is chopping up some fresh veggies for our döner. And you know what? When you're at home, you can just toss them all in the same bowl. We're not a restaurant here. There's no need to keep them in separate little bowls. There's no price for that. But you do want to start with red cabbage and toss that in a bit of lemon to make sure it doesn't oxidize and turn a weird blue color. Then add finely minced iceberg lettuce, cut an onion into thin slivers, and then dice a deseeded tomato. The seeds have way too much water. Now finally add some cucumber, sliced and cut into little planks, a bit of sumac on top, and completely untraditionally, I decided to add some Turkish pickles, just because I love what they do to shawarma. And now, with all of that ready, I need a taste test. But since I am obviously biased, I'm gonna call the most qualified person for this job ever, which is my buddy Wei Xiang. The two of us made a video introducing you guys to 4 of our favorite döner places in all of Berlin a while back, so you might remember him. If my döner passes the Wei Xiang test, I think I'm golden. But first, a word from this video's sponsor, Squarespace. You might remember I'm researching all of these döner recipes because I want to build a website that is a one-stop guide for everyone who wants to make döner kebab at home. Squarespace makes that incredibly easy. And every time I use Squarespace, I keep discovering some cool new features. Let's say I wanted to add a little block to the side. You know, keep adding fresh thoughts whenever I have them, no problem. Few clicks and it's done. So if there's anything you would like to share with the world, why not start a completely free trial at squarespace.com. And once you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Andong for 10% off your first purchase. But now, let's see if my Döner passes the Weichang test. This is the conclusion, the grand finale of my Döner series.
Yes.
Drizzle.
Drip, drop, drizzle.
This is the bread.
Is it DIY?
This is DIY. This is self-made bread.
I think this one looks better even.
It definitely looks better, but like the texture is a bit different.
Yum.
Inspired by all the sauces, so it's kräuter and garlic at the same time. These are all the veggies that go into a Döner normally. So I'm just making basically a Döner salad. Potato, eggplant, carrot combo.
Oh man, it's gonna be so good.
Rebaked, re-grilled Döner meat.
It's gonna melt. It's gonna melt in my mouth.
1 second.
Nice. Oh, of course.
It's falling out, but that's not a bad sign. It's not a bad sign. Okay.
Now, the worst thing that you can get is an empty Döner.
Yes.
An almost empty Döner.
Yes.
Do I have your permission to eat it?
You have my permission to eat it and tell the audience what you think.
I've tried many a Döner, but never a self-made one. It's really good, man.
Nice.
It's really good. The bread is really crispy, crunchy.
Yeah.
It's great. And I gotta say, I was a little bit worried that you didn't add spicy sauce, but this one, I don't know. I don't need spicy if I have this sauce. It's really good.
Criterion 1. Is this recognizable as a Berlin style Döner?
This is a Berlin Döner. I guess the only thing that you really can recreate is the spit thing. So the experience of seeing your Döner being made before your eyes. But I think it's a pretty good trade-off if you don't have that. But if you know that you have quality meat, I take quality meat anytime over the spit.
Well, you could have both, technically.
I saw it, but it's really difficult to pull off.
Yeah.
And it's not realistic, right? That's the second criteria. You need to be able to do it at home.
And then the third criterion is...
Can I finish this?
Yes, totally. Third criterion is, does it have a known twist?
Two things that take this into a little bit of a different direction that I really like is, I think, the sauce. The first one, it's your own creation, and it's great. And the second thing is that you really change the ratio between the fresh vegetables and the meat. And it's definitely something I like, because I usually ask for more vegetables in my Döners anyway. So I think these two things, that's the two things I can see in this Döner, and I like them both. So thanks for creating my own custom-made Döner, just for my taste.
Awesome. Well, thank you for eating.
Thank you for preparing. I'm gonna eat all of it.
Yes. Subscribe.